Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into something pretty unique today. We're going to be looking at a Christian perspective on, well, life. It's inspired by a sermon called Ikorjovian Woyan, a Christian perspective on life. And it's based on a passage from Revelations 1.45a. Preparing for this deep dive got me thinking about time, about how we see it, and how this eternal now from God's perspective really changes things.
It's a pretty powerful concept, no doubt about it. So easy to get stuck in the past, right? Or worry about what's coming next. This sermon, though, it's saying there's another way. Like, we can find a whole different kind of fulfillment, right now in this moment, if we can just align ourselves with how God experiences time.
Absolutely. You said it. It's almost like stepping outside the way we normally think about time, isn't it? The sermon, it describes God as he who is and who was and who is to come. So it's not the same as past, present, future for him, is it?
No, not at all. It's like he's experiencing all of time at once,
Yeah.
this eternal now. It's like if you could see the beginning, the middle, and the end of a movie all at the same time. That's the idea the sermon is getting at when it describes how God sees time. And for us, we experience time in a straight line, one step at a time. It's a challenge, trying to even imagine that. But it makes you think about how we live our lives, that's for sure.
So, okay, how do we even begin to get our heads around this eternal now? And what does it even mean for us practically? The sermon brings up Joseph from the book of Genesis. That story always stood out to me.
Oh, Joseph. It's a powerful story, really powerful. He's sold in slavery, imprisoned unjustly, but he ends up in a position of power, right, in Egypt. But the sermon doesn't just talk about the ups and downs of his life. There's something deeper there.
Yeah, it's like even when things were so rough for him, Joseph was still present. He didn't dwell on what happened before or freak out about what was going to happen. It's like he was already tapping into that eternal now, in a way, without even knowing it.
Exactly. And the sermon's point is that this focus on the present, it wasn't just Joseph getting by. It was a big part of why he was successful.
Okay, I'm really curious about that.
Yeah.
How did being present help Joseph rise to power?
Think about it. Even as a slave, Joseph was known for his diligence, his integrity. The sermon points out that he just put his all into every task, big or small. Didn't matter. He built strong relationships, even when surrounded by, people who weren't exactly trustworthy. By being present, fully present in each situation, he built this foundation of trust, of excellence, and that led to his promotion, ultimately.
So it's not like we're supposed to just accept our circumstances, right? It's more like we're supposed to engage with them in a way that honors God, in a way that uses the gifts we've been given.
Right, and there's this fantastic quote in the sermon that I love. It says, "The most important time in my life is now. The most important person is the one I'm with now. And the most important work is what I'm doing now." It's a call to action, Stop worrying and start living in the moment.
Wow. It's true, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in the what ifs and if onlys. But when you bring yourself back to the present, to the people you're with, the things you're doing, there's a clarity there, a purpose.
It's true. And the sermon goes on to say that this isn't just about feeling good about yourself. It's tied to how we understand faithfulness.
That's interesting. How does living in the present connect to being faithful?
Well, the sermon challenges this idea we sometimes have, that faithfulness is about some big thing you do in the future, some big achievement or something. Instead, it says true faithfulness is about consistently living for God in the present, even in the everyday stuff, even when things are hard.
So it's not waiting for a big opportunity to serve God later on. It's realizing that every moment, every interaction is a chance to live out your faith.
Exactly. To explain this point, the sermon talks about the early Christians, the ones in the 7 churches of Asia. They were persecuted, for their beliefs. Their example, it's really something, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. They definitely weren't promised an easy life, no suffering or anything. Their strength came from their faith, their relationship with God, right there with them through the trials.
And speaking of powerful examples, there's that story, the one about the Korean Christians, the ones found during that tunnel construction project in North Korea.
Oh, wow. That story gets to you. Found hidden in a tunnel after decades. Imagine that. When they're about to be executed, the mother tells her child to tell the executioner, "I love you," and to believe in Jesus so they can meet in heaven. Talk about living in the present, right? Choosing faith, even when facing death.
It's a reminder, faithfulness isn't waiting for things to be better or easier. It's about honoring God with what you do, what you say in every single moment, no matter what's happening.
There's a quote from Luke 60.10 that the sermon uses too. It says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much." It's a powerful reminder.
It really is. It's those small things, the everyday things that
Yeah.
build real faith, the kind that doesn't waver. And, there's another incredible example in this sermon, too. Polycarp, the early Christian martyr. His story, it really shows what a life devoted to God looks like.
Absolutely. Polycarp burned at the stake for what he believed. He's one of those figures in history who just embodies unwavering faith. Before they killed him, he said, "For 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king and my savior?" Every time I hear that, chills.
Those words weren't something he just came up with on the spot. They were his whole life, years of choosing God every day, every moment. He was willing to die with such courage because he had spent his life practicing faithfulness in the present.
It makes you think about how we view service and ministry today, doesn't it? Like, maybe it's not about waiting for that perfect moment, that big stage, the recognition. Maybe it's about choosing every day to live your faith, even in the ordinary things.
You're absolutely right. And actually, the sermon takes it a step further even. It challenges this common idea that ministry is just about doing things for God. There's a whole different perspective. It really does challenge how we think about it, doesn't it? It's not just about doing things for God.
Well, the sermon introduces us to Kim Hae-young. She was a missionary who worked in Botswana and Bhutan. Her story, it really hits on what it means to live in the moment, to serve God, but maybe in a way we don't always think about.
Okay, you've got me intrigued. What's so unique about her story?
Well, first off, she had a spinal disability. If you imagine the challenges.
Yeah.
But she still devoted her life to missionary work. And there's this quote from her that really gets to me. She said, "True ministry is living with the Lord and meeting his needs."
Meeting his needs. Wow, that really flips things around, doesn't it? It's not how we usually think about serving God.
It does. The sermon talks about how we often approach service with this mindset of, what can I do for God? Like,
Yeah.
it's all about us, what we achieve, what we accomplish. Kim Hae-young's view, though, it's much deeper. Yeah, instead of focusing on what we can give to God, maybe you should be asking, what does God need?
Exactly. And there's this story the sermon tells about Kim Hae-young in Botswana. Other missionaries, they decided to leave. It was tough there, but she felt God wanted her to stay.
I can only imagine how hard that must have been, especially with her physical limitations.
Yeah.
What made her stay?
The sermon says she felt God telling her, let's live here together. Her staying wasn't about some big mission or outcome, It was about being with God wherever he led her.
That's beautiful. Surrendering to God's will right here, right now. Even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense. It ties back to that eternal now idea, doesn't it? Trusting that God's with us, guiding us every step of the way, just being open to where he leads.
It is fascinating. And by shifting our focus,
Ooh.
from doing for God to just being with God, it changes everything. It's not about our efforts. It's about aligning ourselves with his purpose in this moment.
So it's not that the actions don't matter, it's the motivation behind them, right?
Yes. If we're always chasing recognition, trying to build ourselves up, we miss the point completely. But when we approach everything, our work, relationships, even the little things, with the idea of being present with God, meeting his needs, that's where the real purpose is.
It's like that saying, bloom where you're planted. Don't keep looking for something bigger, better down the road. Find purpose in being present with God, right here, right now. Let him work through us.
And by focusing on the present, we're not ignoring the future either. We're building a foundation for a future that's rooted in God.
It's like a ripple effect, Aligning ourselves with God's will now. It sets things in motion, leads us where we're supposed to be. But it all starts with surrendering to this moment. Saying, God, what do you need from me right now?
This whole conversation has really got me thinking. It's true we get stuck in the past, worry about the future, but this sermon, it reminds us that true fulfillment, it comes from aligning with God's eternal now, living faithfully in the present moment.
I couldn't agree more. It's like a weight lifted.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, this idea of living in the present, it's not just a Christian thing, is it? You see it in other spiritual traditions too. Buddhism, mindfulness.
You're right. There's something universal there, I think, like a basic human need for connection, meaning maybe by embracing the present moment, we're tapping into a truth that goes beyond any one religion, connecting with something bigger than ourselves, something that gives us purpose.
This sermon, it makes you think about time differently too.
Yeah.
Usually you see it as a line, a series of events leading to something in the future. But God's perspective, that eternal now, it's completely different.
It is, and it might be hard to fully grasp. But even trying to understand it can change how we live. It
Right.
encourages us to be more present in our relationships, appreciate the little things, and approach everything we do with more purpose.
Like we were talking about, those early Christians facing persecution, the Korean Christians in that tunnel. Their faith didn't mean life would be easy. It was a source of strength, hope, in the midst of suffering, finding God, even in darkness.
It's a powerful message for us today, isn't it? When we face our own difficulties, it reminds us that faith isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about finding God's presence within it, his strength.
Being present in those tough moments, trusting he's with us, choosing to respond with love and faith even when it's hard.
And that brings us back to service and ministry. If we can shift our focus from doing for God to simply being with God, everything changes.
It becomes less about trying to achieve something and more about being a channel for God's love, his grace in the world.
And that, I believe, is the essence of a truly meaningful life.
You know, it's amazing. By focusing on the present, we're not just aligning with God's perspective. We're tapping into something fundamental about being human.
Absolutely. The present moment, it's all we really have. The past is gone. The future's not guaranteed. But right now, we have this chance to connect with God, with each other, with the world around us, in a real, meaningful way.
Let go of the worries, the regrets. Embrace the beauty of right now. Live with purpose, joy, be fully present with God.
And as we go through life, let's remember Kim Hae-young's words. True ministry is living with the Lord and meeting his needs. May we all live in a way that meets God's needs in this moment, bringing his love and light to the world around us.
This has been a powerful deep dive into a Christian perspective on life. And before we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with something to think about. What if, instead of asking, what am I going to do for God, we asked, how can I be with God today? It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about checking things off a list. It's about, cultivating a deeper relationship, being more aware of God in our lives.
It is. It's subtle, but it changes everything. It's recognizing that our relationship with God isn't just about what we do. It's about who we are, how we choose to be, in each moment.
And maybe, just maybe, that's where we find what we're looking for, the meaning, the purpose. Not in doing great things, but just in being with God.
You might be right about that. In the quiet moments, prayer, reflection, just being present. That's where we open ourselves to God's guidance. That's where we experience his love.
This whole deep dive, it's a good reminder. The most important time is now. The most important person is the one right in front of us. And the most important work, well, it's to love and be loved.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Embrace the present moment, the joy, the challenges, everything. Find God right there in the middle of it all.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about, as you figure out your own faith, your own purpose.
May we all live with a sense of presence, of purpose, connected to the divine.